Welcome to Generations, a program for seniors, people who know seniors, or people who someday are going to become seniors. I'm David Lapaco, and I'll be your host for this episode. And in a moment, I'll introduce our co-host for the week as well as our special guest. Today, our theme is really about writing and reading. As we'll get to in a bit, our guest is a prolific writer and may be an important inspiration for our viewers, as well as people who dream to take that first step as a writer. For those of you who are not writers, you play an important role too. Every writer needs readers, and reading is pretty much a lifelong pleasure. You can do it from the comfort of your bed or from an easy chair. And so before we get to our guest, let me check in with our co-hosts. How are all of you? And as we begin, can you name something, some piece of writing that has stayed with you all of these years and been impactful? Let's start with Rashida Jenkins. How are you today? And can you think of something that's stayed with you all these years?
Yes, I'm well. Thank you for asking. One of my favorite books is Native Son by Richard Wright. I read that in my early 20s and it still, resonates with me today. So,
Good choice. Good choice. Mike Rosberg is with us. Mike, how are you? And I know you have been an avid reader over the years. Can you pick out one thing that had an impact on you as a reader?
Well, certainly in my early 20s, I did a lot of reading. And The Stranger by Albert Camus is a book that has long stuck with me. It's a book where a person just goes through life. Uh, Whatever happens, happens, and whatever doesn't, doesn't. And so he there's a scene where he's just walking down the street behind a couple of other people who are going to his mother's funeral. And then a little later on after that, he has this great kind of explosion of feeling and emotions and thoughts. And that's kind of how the book ends. It's quite a route.
I'm feeling very existentialist feelings right now as you talk about Albert Camus.
Yeah.
Finally, we have Candy Pettiford. Candy, how are you doing? And what's some writing that's really influenced you in your life?
Well, it's a fabulous day, and I'm doing well, David. Thank you, everyone. Good to see you all. And I'd have to say, having a long-term illness, I started writing, and that gave me a purpose to get up. So, my 10 books, and I have some good questions for you, Mr. Roger.
Okay, thank you so much. And then usually because Candy or someone else will say I should be answering my own question, there are a lot of possibilities. One that just jumped out at me, I'll mention it because it was sort of a pivotal book for me in terms of thinking about writing and thinking about life. And it's a book called Even Cowgirls Get the Blues by Tom Robbins. And I think what that book told me was you could think outside the box. You could have your own style. You could be different. And different was good, different was okay. And it kind of liberated me mentally to think that I didn't have to abide by a whole bunch of standard rules and conventions and things like that. So that's what that book, I think, did for me. Well, we've all been influenced by a variety of books. We just kind of scratched the surface here, but let's look at the writing side of it. We have a special guest today, and he is a very accomplished special guest, and his name is Roger Barr. Roger is a writer and writing teacher. He lives in St. Paul. He's the author of 11 published books, more than 30 published short stories, an award-winning play, and newspaper and magazine articles. Barr's short story Puzzle Pieces received the 2021 Hal Prize for short stories. So, Roger, you are an accomplished writer. We're privileged to have you today. I think we talked about having you start out with reading an excerpt from one of your books, Murder on the Hill, which involved an unsolved murder in St. Paul in 1937, and you kind of got caught up in that. But Roger, say hello to our viewers. Show us your the book, and why don't you read a short passage, maybe 5 minutes from the book that you've selected? And welcome to our show.
Okay, David, thank you. And hello, panelists. It's nice to be on the air with you today. And I can't resist the temptation to mention books that have been instrumental in my thoughts through the years. And I'll mention two. Not my all-time favorite, but a really powerful book is Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, which I read about every 5 years. And I read it because you can reinterpret the present by reading that book written 100 years ago. The other book that's really made a profound impact on me is by Colson Whitehead. It's called Harlem Shuffle. In reading that book, I felt like I got as close to understanding what living as a Black person in a white world was like. And he has two books. A second book, Crook Manifesto, and a third in this trilogy that I'm anxiously waiting to come out. And Colson Whitehead taught me a lot. So my most recent book is called A Murder on the Hill. It is a nonfiction true crime account of an unsolved murder in St. Paul, Minnesota, that took place in December of 1937. What I did in this book was to access the actual police files and police reports, public documents, and newspaper accounts. I reconstructed the murder investigation in real time from the moment the crime was discovered through 16 years that the file covers. Once I had recreated the investigation, I jumped to the present and went back and analyzed the reasons why the case was never solved. These themes came up in the book that will be familiar to people. First, the vulnerability of women, because the victim was Ruth Munson, a woman. Economic insecurity, because it took place during the Great Depression. Mistrust of the police, police reform, race and racism. Ruth was a white woman that had connections to the Rondo community that the police were never able to unravel, and that's part of the reason why the case was never solved. So this is the book, A Murder on the Hill, and I'm going to read the opening to give you an idea of what it was like on that morning of December 9th, 1937. Here we go. St. Paul's Ramsey Hill neighborhood, December 9th, 1937, 4:45 a.m. Darkness. To save money during these tough Depression years, the city shut off the streetlights at 2:30 a.m. and they would not come on again until 5. On the southwest corner of Dayton Avenue and Virginia Street, right next to the vacant Aberdeen Hotel, several paper boys gathered under the unlit streetlight and shivered in the near-zero temperatures. The boys waited with growing impatience for the arrival of the St. Paul Pioneer Press's route driver, Harold Lewis, who always delivered their copies to this corner by 4:45. On this frigid morning, Lewis was running late. Once they received their papers, the paper boys would fan out into the dark streets to deliver the latest news to their faithful subscribers. At this early hour, the streets of Minnesota's capital city were quiet. Only the paper boys and the hardiest of souls were out. The men and women who had dressed up and gone out the night before to forget their troubles through a night of drinking, dancing, and, hopefully, romance, had either met with good fortune or straggled home during the night's wee dark hours and crawled into bed. The men and women facing a new day's work were still tucked warmly in their beds. Much to the boys' annoyance, Lewis did not arrive with their papers until almost 5:30 a.m. There had been a problem with the presses, he explained. The boys quickly loaded their papers into their shoulder bags and set out. Paperboy Herman Koroshetz on his route passed by the hulking shadow of the Aberdeen Hotel twice, once by the hotel's front entrance at 350 Dayton Avenue, and later past the rear of the building, which faced Selby Avenue. In his haste to deliver his papers, return home, and get ready for school at Mechanic Arts High School, the 17-year-old paper boy noticed nothing out of the ordinary. Stephen Westbrook, on his delivery route, passed by the east side of the Aberdeen on Virginia Street twice, once at the beginning of his route and once at the end. On his second trip by the hotel, he noticed something odd about the iron gates in the hotel's backyard garden that opened onto Virginia Street. If I'm not mistaken, the 18-year-old Westbrook recalled, other mornings when I come by, they're wired shut. But this particular morning, it seems that they were open when I went by. I cannot say positively. The open gates were noticed by another resident out at this early hour. Mrs. L. Bradbury left her apartment at 207 Virginia every morning at precisely 5:40 a.m. and walked south across Dayton on her way toward Selby, where she caught the streetcar to work. This morning, when she passed the hotel, she also noted that the iron gates were open. As the paper boys finished up their deliveries, lights began to wink on in the houses and apartment buildings, early risers beginning their workday. Among the winking lights were those of Mrs. Nellie McKiernan in the Dakota Apartments, number 5, at 370 Selby Avenue. Mrs. McKiernan's daughter, Margaret, was also up at this early hour because she had to go to work. At 6:45 a.m., when Margaret McKiernan started to lower the shade so she could dress for work, she noticed what appeared to be a fire burning in the window of the Aberdeen Hotel. The eight-story structure towered above the buildings lining the north side of their street. It took several minutes for the mother and daughter to convince themselves that the vacant hotel was really on fire. Mrs. McKernan then called the fire department.
Hmm.
Very good.
Thank you very much. Very elegant writing. One of the things I thought about while you were reading is, and I think a lot of people who don't do writing don't appreciate this, but in order to write well, you often always need to do a lot of outside research. And it's not just true with nonfiction, but fiction stuff as well. We have some friends, one of whom is a physician, and you will see his name in the credits for every mystery novel written by a woman named Karen Rose, whose novels you can find at Barnes and Noble, those kind of places. And if you're writing about murders, you need someone who knows about the physical aspects of murder and people dying and all that sort of thing. And so Karen Rose relies on our friend Mark to make sure that what she says about anything involving physiology or death is correct. So I think that was one thing that really struck me. Other panelists, what reactions do you have to Roger's?
Well, I want to ask what interested you in the first place to pick. There was a lot of murders, and my family's from the Rondo community. What interested you in that story particularly? That story, that
Yeah,
one.
Andy, that's the question I get most often asked, other than who done it, which we don't know. But I got my first introduction to the Ruth Munson murder case by reading um, Larry Millett's book, Lost Twin Cities. The Aberdeen was raised in the 1940s, and his book is about lost buildings. He had a biography, essentially, of that building, and he mentioned that the Ruth Munson murder occurred in that building, and the case was, I'm paraphrasing, never solved. And everybody likes a mystery. And I thought, being a feature writer, on top of other things that I do, that I'd just knock off a feature about this. I found out there had been nothing uh, written about this case for decades, 60, 70 years. And even though it was it was the O.J. Simpson case of its time in terms of local importance and sensationalism. And I went to the police department and was able to access the records. And as they say, I fell down the rabbit hole. And as I got farther and farther in and discovered the connections to the Rondo community, it opened a whole area of discovery up for me. And I learned a lot about the community, and am a full supporter of the efforts to restore the community's name and cap the freeway.
Hmm.
Well, as I heard you read what you were reading, it seemed to me like you were writing this as a very detailed reporter and certainly not as a novelist. So when you approach particular subjects you want to write about, is that your intention, simply to give the detailed facts about a particular interesting story?
My answer to that is the material always tells you what to do. You just have to listen carefully. And when you're writing nonfiction, you look at it and it will tell you what needs to be said and in what order, where the gaps are, how you fill them in, or if you can fill them in. If you're writing fiction, Some people write with start with a blank page, and other people start with a concept or a plotted story. And whichever way works for you is the way to do it. When I teach writing, I try and find out how people are most comfortable doing it and help them improve on their methods rather than say, well, do it this way. But know how you do it and do it better that way. And so when you write a piece of fiction, I'd like to have a story arc in mind because that helps me know whether something stays in or something goes out. Because if it don't contribute to the arc, it goes.
I
But
enjoyed.
you wouldn't consider this book to be a fiction book, would you?
Not at all. It's footnoted heavily, 500 footnotes in it. So it is a piece of nonfiction, but it is written in a narrative fiction style,
Yeah.
as opposed to being a newspaper article or a piece of scholarship. It's a narrative style.
I enjoyed the excerpt very much, and it I could see what you were reading. So much so where it's like, did any of it come from creative license, or was all of it factual?
Because I was, my publisher was the Minnesota Historical Society, one of, if not the dominant and most respected press in Minnesota. I was stuck to the truth. And so if it wasn't documented, I didn't include it. So I don't speculate on what investigators might have thought at all until the end when it's very clear that we're done with the investigation and there's some room for speculation, but I didn't make wild speculations then either. You have to respect the material.
Mhm.
Now, Roger, have you ever thought of writing for children? Does
Um,
anything about children,
I, I've
come to mind?
I've made a couple of attempts to write for children, and somehow the adult topics always shove their way into the story. I have this series of stories. Beyond this book, one of the things I'm known for are what refer to as the Bartholomew holiday stories. They are a series of eight, or excuse me, 27 stories written between 1997 and 2024, all of which have been published, and they concern the same Highland Park family, but they have branched out into covering social issues, faith, family issues, issues like racism, poverty, addiction and recovery, death. They're Christmas stories, but they really touch on real life. And families told me they would get the Villager newspaper and now the Pioneer Press and hold these stories and read them with their kids on Christmas Eve. I thought, well, I should write stories for kids. And every time I tried to do that, the adult topics wiggled their way in. So the children's writing is a special task and a special talent that I don't seem to have.
Or do you use illustrators with it, or you just kind of just is it just like a little novel, or is there illustrations?
The stories were published first in the Villager from 1997 to 2020. And then because I do something related to this, we made a shift to the Pioneer Press with the 2020 story when the pandemic started. And I ran out of ideas in 2001. And so I thought, well, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? And there's a nativity scene that is the central image in the stories. I decided to destroy that scene and there doing an act of violence. And so there was a police investigation. And at the time, I was working with the St. Paul school system, and I knew Tony Carter, who was on the St. Paul Board of Education at that time. And I contacted Tony. I said, I understand your husband is a police officer. Do you think he would be willing to read this story and correct the police work so it was accurate? And she said, yeah, sure he would. So he did. And I was so grateful that I changed the name of the character from Officer something to Officer Carter. And I realized I can't change just the name, I have to change the character too. And so Officer Carter became a Black character, which eventually opened a whole new area of exploration of these stories. And Officer Carter and the central character, Matt, and a man who runs a food shelf whose street name he still goes by was Candyman. These three have developed a long-term friendship during the course of the stories. I introduced a food shelf into the plot in 2003, which reoccurs all the way through. We, in 2004, started doing readings to collect first food and now just donations for area food shelves. And these readings, two collections of stories that were published in book form. I'll show them to you. Um, the first one was Getting Ready for Christmas and Other Stories. The second one was The Christmas Promise. These collections and actual readings and donations have raised $100,000 for area food shelves since in the last 20 years. And I'm a believer that we all should use our talents to do public good, and that's my effort to do that.
Thank you.
Wow.
Uh,
Um,
well,
Roger, you also teach some writing classes or involved with writing groups. You're involved with writing groups, aren't you?
Yes, there is a writers group that I have belonged to 38 years. The two of us who have been, this is like a rock and roll band. We've had people come and go through the years, but well, one guy and I have been in the group all the way through. The last time I counted, our members and alums have published 26 books over the years. And so we've had good representation. I also, and as belonging to a writing group does two things. It gives you the opportunity to have your work critiqued by people who know what writing is about and how to do it. But also we support ourselves in our efforts to publicize our work, market our work, and bemoan and whine when we need to about the writing industry, which is a very tough industry.
Mm.
Yeah, and of course, for better or worse, I don't think people who haven't done writing fully appreciate what a lonely kind of experience it is at some levels. That you are by yourself. You can't do it in a chaotic environment usually. You're pretty much on your own, and so linking up with other people is a way to break through, because otherwise you're going to feel pretty lonely as a writer. It's a kind of introspective kind of place that you have to be. And so you need to have connections with other people. So our viewers might keep that in mind. Other things that our panelists are thinking or asking.
well, I was just going to mention that I understand you've written one book about Malcolm X and another book about Richard Nixon, who are kind of on the opposite end of the political scale. Uh, would a person who reads those two books have any knowledge of what your particular political beliefs are, or are they indeed just very much biographies of those two people?
Yeah, there tended to be biographies. Those two books were part of a the Importance of series, or a company that publishes books for high school age readers. When people are in the old days, when you were going to write a paper and you had to go to the library and get a book about, those books were written for that audience of students. I was interested because I grew up during the Vietnam War and the Nixon administration and Watergate. So that's why I picked on Richard Nixon. And I didn't feel that I knew very much about the Black experience in America, and that opportunity to learn came up when I saw a list of books that they were interested in covering, and Malcolm X's name was on it, and I signed up. And I did about 10,000 pages of research and reading to be able to write accurately about his career. And it helped me by opening the door to learning about the Black experience in America.
Yeah. And of course, we didn't have time to go through your entire resume, but when I looked at it, it struck me that there are a lot of baby boomers out there who would be natural followers and readers of your stuff because it's a very rich accounting of the middle part of the 20th century. Other panelist questions or comments?
I wanted to ask Roger, what is your process? Do you go away for a weekend and have a story in mind that you want to write, or do you just kind of write when you have the time, or you write all the time?
I've been a deadline journalist, and so you learn in there, you sit down and you do it because at midnight's your deadline, So
Hmm.
I can do that when I need to. I can also fritter away days and weeks and not do very much. Mostly, I think it's because things are percolating, and that's a subconscious process. And when it's time for it to roll out, it will. And sometimes you'll noodle something for a long time and not seem to be able to find an out, and then it just drops into place and you go forward. So I encourage people to write any way that works for them. And sometimes one thing works and sometimes another. And all you have to do is keep your ear tuned to know when you should listen to something.
Wow.
That's
When
Well,
favorite.
people,
in our final 90 seconds, any remaining questions? Candy, you can
I
step.
just want to jump in real quick and say, for somebody who wants to start writing, saying, I want to start writing, give them a real quickie, Roger, how to get
the best way to start writing is just start. People say,
very
"Oh,
good.
I don't know where to start." Start with what you have. Organizing into a finished project is a separate process that has a different set of skills involved. So until you've generated your content, you can't decide what order and things it needs to be in. So just start. I know a lot of seniors want to write their memoirs and they said, I don't know how to start. And my suggestion is start with the first thing that comes to mind and go on from there.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. And of course, given word processing technology, you can sculpt a piece and cut and paste like crazy. In the old days, you had to cut and paste with scissors and tape. Now you can do it electronically and really begin to manufacture a product. Just do it bit by bit. It doesn't have to be perfect right away.
And recognize the fact that the best writing has lots of revision in it. The sentences do not come out squeezed on the page like they're coming out of the toothpaste.
Exactly. Well, Roger Barr, got to tell you, this time went very, very quickly. And I hope that our viewers got some sense of what the work of a writer is like and what writers need to be thinking. But also as a reader, I hope that you are thinking of what kinds of writing do I want to consume, because it's a great pleasure at any age to be able to consume good writing. Uh, so with all of our panelists, Candy, Rashida, and Michael, thank you so much for being here today. Hope your reading and writing goes well. And Roger, thank you for being on the program. I hope our viewers will benefit from having heard you talk, and I certainly hope they'll benefit by reading some of those things you've written. So, on behalf of all of you, thanks so much. And we await another opportunity the next time around for another edition of Generations.